Today we're talking about AuDHD, which is autism and ADHD combined, and it's its own thing. It's different than just, the definition of ADHD or the definition of autism. If you have AuDHD, you're going to have both, and that actually can show up differently. And the reason that I chose this topic is because I know that there are people watching this who have it that don't know. It's really interesting because they can kind of mask each other, especially if you're late diagnosed. You could have it. There's also a lot of overlap. So you could have just ADHD and a little bit of overlap with autism, but not necessarily have AuDHD or have autism. So that's the other thing, is there's just not as much information out there. And sometimes it's hard to know. And so my goal with this is, if you have it, the reason why labels are important is because if you don't have a label, right, you think you might be lazy, you're a procrastinator, you don't care, or, you can't organize, you're messy, like all this stuff, right? And so a label is so important because instead of all of that, or, I'm not good socially, or people don't like me, have trouble making friends, I'm too rigid, I'm too strict. Instead of all of this labels and this shame and this criticism we put on ourselves, we get to have a name for it, and we get to have a community, have resources and tools. And so that's why I chose AuDHD for this call, because it's a big thing, especially in the entrepreneur world, and a lot of people don't know that they may or may not have it. So that's what we're going to talk about. And yeah, I think there's going to be a light bulb moment, definitely, for some people on here. So AuDHD, first off, I'll start out. I have AuDHD, and I had no idea I had autism too until 2 years ago. And I went to a therapist for help with ADHD and executive function. And I kept telling him what some of my challenges. And he was like, hey, there are a lot of flags for autism. You should probably get tested. And so ta-da, I have autism as well. And with autism, what I want to say about that too is there is a stereotype out there of what autism is. And there's three different categories of autism, or three different levels per se. So level 1, level 2, and level 3. I have level 1, and level 3 is going to be nonverbal, can't take care of yourself, may not be able to do basic functions. It just depends. But essentially level 1, 2, and 3 is categorized by the level of support needs someone with autism has. And so a lot of people, as they say, high functioning is the term. And I'm not an expert on autism. ADHD, I would say definitely that's my thing. So if anybody has heard something different, let me know. But I have spent some time learning about it quite a bit. But level 1 is often sometimes difficult because it's not severe enough to be caught, and you don't qualify for some of the support needs. And so you might be constantly exhausted, or you might be in this burnout and you don't know what it is, and nobody's really told you, because especially if you have ADHD, it masks it. And so it doesn't get caught, right? So when we look at ADHD, like an AuDHD brain, you're going to have almost two opposing parts. And so one part of you with ADHD is going to want novelty and newness and change and chase the dopamine and all these things, right? And then you have this other separate part, the autism part, that's going to want sameness and rigidity and rules and structure, or some kind of container, right? Or maybe you don't want rules or structure. Too much is too much. But if you have nothing, you flail and you feel really uncomfortable, and you might miss some social cues. You could with autism. However, and this is why mine took a while to get diagnosed, you also may make social situations your special interest. So I was pursuing psychology and health and wellness in college, and psychology was like people were my special interest. And so you can actually fly under the radar if you love people, or it's your special interest. And it doesn't mean that you can't make eye contact. It doesn't mean that you can't make friends or you're super awkward. It means that the way you interpret cues or miscues sometimes can be different. So again, they say if you know one neurodivergent person, you know one neurodivergent person, right? But when you have a brain that's constantly chasing change and stimulation and excitement, and then another part that's wanting sameness and routine, it's really interesting, right? And it's kind of like which one may or may not win. What I want to show you is some charts. I thought visuals would be really helpful, and these are more from a clinical perspective, right? So ADHD, right? Seeking novelty, we might be motivated by new and exciting experiences. A lot of it's attention regulation. So it's not that we have trouble focusing, It's that what are we focusing on and for how long? Because we can hyper focus when it's interesting or new or creating dopamine or challenging or exciting. When it's boring or routine, we don't see the purpose or there's not any, consequences. The brain just doesn't create dopamine sometimes or regulate it. So ADHD, we can have difficulty with social cues sometimes, and missing social cues, impulsivity. And you'll see there's a difference between holistic social cues and social cues, because you can have that with autism, but it's different. I'm going to explain that. And ADHD, we have an interest-based nervous system. So we're motivated by focus and by personal interests, right, and excitement. And then we can have hyperactivity and impulsivity, and we're restless. So on the autistic side, right, ADHD is seeking novelty. Autism is going to seek familiarity. So we might want certain routines that are the same. When you have ADHD, you might want some that are the same and some that are different. So you're going to have some structure and some sameness, and then some impulsivity and like novelty seeking. So we like routines for comfort and predictability. And what this might look like is you might have a routine that every night when you come home, you have a certain type of soda water, right? Or you're going to see like sameness in some of these things, and it's helping the nervous system regulate. And then you're going to see differences. So you might have a same song that you listen to over and over and over again, because the nervous system, especially with autism, likes sameness. And so you might have certain things you notice that doesn't make sense that you just do repetitively, versus doing the exact same schedule every day, time blocking every 30 minutes. Like, it doesn't have to be that rigid, especially with the ADHD. So difficulty with holistic social cues. So this is a little bit different in the way you analyze and you decode them. So with ADHD, you might miss cues because you're not paying attention or you're focused on something else. With autism, you might see the cues, but you might interpret them more literally, or you might not understand them unless they're more clear. And then this one, monotropism. So tendency to focus intensely on single interests or activities. So with ADHD, it's an interest-based nervous system, and it's by what's creating dopamine, right? With autism, you're going to have more narrow interests, more monotropic interests. So 1, 2, 3, like very narrow. And that's what's going to give you your dopamine. So you're still feeding the dopamine of the ADHD, but your interests are going to be a lot more narrow. And then you're going to do really well with clear, detailed verbal explanations and context versus something that's, a little bit more general, or you're supposed to assume something. And then also you can see the overlap, right? So also see this. So I'm not saying you do or don't have autism. I'm not here to convince you of that. What I am saying is there's a lot of overlap too. And they're finding more and more about almost it could be ADHD and autism in its own spectrum in its sense, because it's all neurodiversity, and they're finding a lot of clues that genetically there might be similarities. So you'll see the overlap. Both stim and fidget, it might look a little bit different. Both have sensory differences. Autism might be a bit more extreme. Impulse control difficulties, that could be a little bit more extreme with autism. Emotion regulation, more extreme with autism. So you're going to see like all of these things it's like the volume's turned up a lot if you also have autism, but you could definitely have both. Another chart that I really like, this one. Okay. Remember when I talked about how it can present differently? So if you just have ADHD, you might be easily distracted or have trouble focusing. If you have autism, you're going to hyper-focus on specific interests. So if you have AuDHD, you're going to have inconsistent attention. You might struggle with transitions from one thing to the next, and you might be hyper-focused on those special interests, and like you can't stay away from them because they actually help you regulate. So here, ADHD, you might be more impulsive. You might interrupt conversations. Autism, you're going to struggle with reading the cues. So you might say something that you don't know is not the right thing to say, and you might interrupt, and it might come across as impulsive, and you might be a little bit more monotone, and people might totally misread you when you're a really kind person, but they think you're being rude, right? Because your tone or because the timing. So again, you're going to see, and you might mask your difficulties as well. This is interesting. So with ADHD, sensory sensitivity, you might seek or avoid sensory input. So a lot of us with ADHD are sensory seeking, whereas autism, we can get sensory overload. It's the volume is turned up on everything. We're getting sensory overload. However, good sensory things can be amazing. So for me, I wonder if anybody has this. So music. Have you ever had this like loud music bothers you unless it's your music? Have you ever experienced that? Right? Like, or if you get to control it, it's so, or the radio, like, I don't want the radio on. But then when you can have the radio on, and it's not like we're selfish or whatever. We get to control the sensory overload because we can actually get overstimulated. When it's good music, though, because we have an interest-based nervous system, and with autism, we take in 70% more stimulus than somebody without ADHD. So if there's music that's beautiful, like, I'm going to feel that in my bones sometimes. Like, it can be really healing. And so we can, or art, right? Or sensory experiences, or a soft blanket, because we're taking in so much more sensory data. We can really heal from good sensory stuff at a level that someone else, I don't know if it seems like something beautiful or something that touches you and you like feel it in your nervous system, you feel it in like your whole body, or you just get really emotional or just really hits you. We can really take in good sensory stuff as well. This isn't so routine and flexibility. So with ADHD, we might struggle with organization. We don't really like strict routines. With autism, we want the routines. We don't like unpredictability. So how this can manifest, especially let's say you have a little bit more of the ADHD, the unpredictability is the key word in this from what I've seen. And I know we have a few new people. I realized I didn't introduce myself. So I've done over 10,000 calls with ADHD entrepreneurs and realtors. And then I have a mental health background, and I ran a huge team doing over 300 sales a year before that. So I've coached with a lot of agents. I've hired a lot of agents. I've coached people outside of it. I think this unpredictability is really key in this, because it can be kind of confusing. Otherwise, like, all of us with ADHD, we're probably going to want structure, but we want flexibility within the structure, right? I think that's just an ADHD thing from my perspective. But the unpredictability, or the some of the key sameness that we need, repetition to feel like we're regulated, that could be a little bit more of the autism. So if all of a sudden plans change, that can be really disrupting to us at a higher level. If someone comes in and they act one way and they act a different way, that could be really jarring for us as well. If we think we have an expectation about something and then that expectation doesn't happen, that can be even more hard. So with autism, again, we have more sensitive nervous systems, and so it's going to be harder to regulate sometimes as well. And so that's going to be interesting. So emotion regulation. So with ADHD, you might have more impulsive emotional reactions. You might get really big feelings, get really angry, get really upset, get really happy. It's going to be a little bit more impulsive. With autism, there's a thing called alexithymia. Has anybody heard of that? I would be surprised if anybody had heard of it. So, and this sometimes with ADHD can happen. So alexithymia is difficulty recognizing and labeling emotions. And it's actually part of the brain structure with some neurodivergent people. So you may say, I don't know what I'm feeling, or you might not even really know you're feeling something, but you're just a little off. So it's trouble identifying, trouble feeling emotions, trouble expressing them, and that can cause a lot of issues too. If you've ever been called a robot, or maybe you don't show your emotions, or you're not as vulnerable, whatever, that can happen as well. Or maybe you're just very stoic. So again, none of this is a bad thing unless it's impairing relationships, and then it's all something you can work on and strengthen that muscle of how to identify the emotions. So that can happen. So intense emotions, and you may have difficulty recognizing feelings. So if you have autism, you feel big feelings, but you don't know what they are. That could be it too. So you might have a meltdown. You might get really dysregulated, and you don't know why. When you don't understand what the emotion is, you can't really release it. So you can stay stuck in it or frozen for days. It's really interesting. ADHD, talk excessively. Autism, we want direct, sometimes predictable communication. So it can kind of, you might struggle in some parts. You might be good at the beginning of a relationship, but struggle how to keep that going. Beginning of a call, but some parts are harder for you. You might talk too much or too little. It's very interesting. Again, it can manifest differently depending on the person. Executive function. So with ADHD, poor time management, we might forget tasks. Executive function with autism is rigid thinking, and we might struggle with planning. So one key thing is like black and white or all or nothing thinking. I need to do this all perfectly, or I'm not going to do it at all, right? Or I have to make all my calls by noon. If I haven't done that, then too bad, I'll try next time, instead of like, hey, why don't I take 30 minutes at lunch and make some more calls, or do it that way. So the rigidity and the black and white and the all or nothing thinking, if that's really, really extreme, that can sometimes be a key indicator. Also, black and white thinking is common with trauma, substance abuse. Sometimes if you have another diagnosis, sometimes some personality disorders, cluster C, cluster B personality disorders. So that all or nothing thinking, rigid thinking can show up there as well. Again, it's really interesting, right? The common strengths: ADHD, creativity, energy, high energy, adaptability. With autism, attention to detail, deep knowledge of interests. So when we look at this as an entrepreneur, a real estate agent, strong pattern recognition and creative problem solving. And you're the one, if you have autism, I think it's been a big asset, is I'm going to do a little bit better with routine than somebody else. And I'm also going to still have some flexibility, still have that ADHD. I'm not averse to like risks taking and things like that. So it can be a really great asset. So those are some charts. You can kind of see what that looks like a little bit. What I would say is, if you think you might have autism or autism as well, AuDHD, a lot of times in our lives, they mask each other. And if you're an adult and you haven't got diagnosed with ADHD either, you've probably learned to mask your traits. So if you do want to pursue a diagnosis, then it's really important to talk to someone who's familiar with AuDHD. Because if you go in there and you make eye contact, because you've learned to do that your whole life because you got reprimanded for not doing that, and you can have a conversation, especially if you're a woman and you're high masking. They didn't even diagnose women with autism until, I forgot the year, but it was too recent. It was kind of crazy. But you want to find somebody who can actually know what high masking looks like to catch that. Because chances are you've probably learned to mask it, right? You're not going to come across as autistic. Like, you're just not. If you've made it this far without a diagnosis, it's probably been criticized out of you, where you're going to come up with ways to like mask it. But when you get home, you're going to be exhausted. So that's a key indicator as well. If you get home and you're finally in your space and you feel like you can take off the mask or you can relax, you might be completely exhausted. That is a thing. And autistic burnout, I want to talk about that as well, because I know some people have experienced that. Who's had burnout in general? Anybody experienced burnout? Not just autistic, but who's got burnout? Okay. What do you type in the chat? How do you know you're in burnout? How do you know you're in burnout? What do you witness? What do you observe? Versus just, oh, I'm tired, I need to take some time off. Like, how do you know, like, oh, shoot, I'm in burnout? Let's see. Yeah. So just, type that in the chat if you want to. Complete shutdown, mental and physical, emotional fatigue, hungover. I start texting or email a few words and then immediately switch to another task. Ignoring the really important things. Catherine, I'm ineffective. I don't want to deal with anything. Yep. Just kind of stop caring about anything around me. Feeling rudderless. Let's see. Non-creative. Brain is quiet, numb. Yep. Okay. Yeah. So autistic burnout, what that can look like is all of that stuff, chronic exhaustion. And you can, if you're really an autistic burnout, you can lose access to skills you used to have. So what I mean by that is things that you were able to do before, like cooking or socializing or even going to work, like all of a sudden you've lost the ability to do that. Some people kind of go nonverbal. It's harder to talk. That can happen too. And sometimes more level 2, some people just go mute. That can happen. So yeah, some people said not finding joy in anything. The risk or consequence I may receive if I lay down doesn't matter anymore. Yes, like lose the skills. Yeah, so you might lose skills where you could do it before. You could do laundry. You could do this stuff. It's like almost total loss of executive function. Sensory overload. So heightened sensitivity to noise, light, or social demands. Noise, light, or social demands. So for me, and I've been in autistic burnout a couple times, and I was in severe autistic burnout. I just climbed out of it probably 4 or 5 months ago, and it lasted like a year because I didn't know what it was. So that's why I'm digging into this more and how to handle it. But yeah, I could hardly feed myself. It was nuts. I could barely work. It was so crazy. Part of that was me working and volunteering with the hurricane and going on a traveling speaking tour and all that stuff. And it was insane. So heightened sensitivity to noise, light, or social demands. And why I'm talking about mine for a second is because noise and light sometimes would give me a headache. I couldn't handle certain things, dogs barking, certain noises that didn't bother me before. All of a sudden, I couldn't handle them anymore. I was so sensitive to the fabric on my clothes. It's like the sensitivity is just turned up on everything. I'd have to wear headphones every time I went into a store because I couldn't handle the sounds. So again, it might look different, but mine was more severe. Communication barriers, so increased difficulty with speech. So again, sometimes you have difficulty articulating thoughts. You might not be able to, certain words, you might not be able to remember quite as well, or you might just be able to kind of speak in like more simple, basic sentences, and you just feel like your brain's not sharp, right? So there's a lot of stuff with autistic burnout on top of the other thing. And when we look at it, and you might even have like self-harm thoughts. Like you could have self-harm thoughts. You could regress on some of your skills. You might have extreme cognitive fog. So your decision paralysis, you can't make decisions. You like might increase stimming. You might like socially withdrawn. You might sleep way too much, or you might not be able to sleep at all. So it's really a big change. If you're like, this is not normal for me. This is not my baseline. Why am I so sensitive? Why are things difficult? Why can't I take care of myself? Why can't I show up? Why can't I do this stuff? So here's the thing. This is not a time to beat yourself up, right? This is not a time to beat yourself up and like try to kick yourself in the pants and shame yourself to get in there. Like that is not the way through autistic burnout. I will tell you right now. The other thing that I want to tell you about with autism is what's called demand avoidance. And we can have that with ADHD too. Again, think of like, and that's why they're saying there's more and more relation to these, and there might be a spectrum. It's almost like some of the ADHD stuff is the same, but it's just the volume's turned up, right? So you're not going to have all the ADHD stuff, but the volume's going to be turned up on stuff. And so demand avoidance, which is with ADHD, versus PDA, which is pathological demand avoidance with autism, it's kind of like demand avoidance on steroids. So demand avoidance is going to be a resistance, anxiety, a shutdown. You might rage, whatever, when you have demands on you, right? And when I was a kid, here's an example, right? I'm cleaning my room because I'm excited to have a clean space finally. And my executive function was really poor as a kid. And my mom yells up the stairs, "You better get your room clean or we're not going to take you to go skate tonight," or whatever. Right. And that pissed me off. And I was like, I'm not going to clean my room. Screw this. Like, I'll skate in the garage. You can't tell me what to do. So I stopped cleaning my room, but that's just a mom being a mom and trying to help. Or somebody saying, if it's something you're already going to do and they're like, "Hey, I need you to do this," or "You need to do this now." It's like, no, I'm not doing it. And it's actually sometimes our nervous system trying to protect ourselves in this fear of not being able to regulate. They're still looking at a lot of the causes. So your demand avoidance might turn up significantly where you can't handle demands from anybody. And if somebody gives you a demand, you do the opposite, right? You do the opposite. So when we look at recovering from autistic burnout, and this is, I think, for anybody. So let's say you don't have autism, but you just have ADHD, or let's say you are just in burnout. Maybe you don't have either. All of this stuff you can use for burnout. So I want to tell you some of the steps to pull that back. If you're not in burnout and you just want to reset before Monday and you want to do this on the weekend, I'm going to tell you how to do that right now. There are some immediate and there are some long-term strategies as well. So here's some things that you can do to pull this back. And again, if you just need to reset. So radical rest. So you want to prioritize your sleep and your downtime without guilt, right? So when we're in burnout, when we have mental health challenges, by the way, when you're in autistic burnout, you're going to see mental health stuff go through the roof. So if you have a diagnosis, if you have anxiety, your anxiety is going to way worse. Volume's going to turn up. If you have depression, you're going to be really, really, really down. I've seen this too. If you have bipolar, right, your swings are going to be a lot more common. You might have more trouble pulling it back or recognizing. So again, the volume's turned up on everything. That's what I'll say for that from what I've seen. And I worked in clinical mental health as well. Because your executive function, your emotion regulation, everything, it's just all taxed. So radical rest, we want to treat it like a physical illness. right? Reduce demand. So this is that demand avoidance. So we want to reduce the demands. If you're a real estate entrepreneur, we have constant demands. Like that's what our phone does, right? It's just constant demands. So even if it's like an hour or two where you set a timer and you reduce demands and you tell your family, hey, for 2 hours, if you could help me, like no one asked me for anything. And that would mean so much to me. And then I'll come out and you can make a list or whatever, right? Depending on how many kids you have or what your home looks like. But we want to take some time to reduce demands and cut back on that. What we're trying to do, think of it's almost like the executive function muscle is this like a little baby muscle, and it's so tired, it's just collapsed. So we want to give that a break. And this is how I got out of this burnout, actually. So I did radical rest, reduced demands, and I've coached other clients through this too, sensory management. So we want to be, if you are undiagnosed or if you're hard on yourself and you have sensory sensitivities to things, sometimes people think, oh, I need to get used to it or build tolerance. No, I actually want you to create like a sensory safe like capsule for yourself and reduce all the uncomfortable things. If a belt is too tight, get rid of it, right? If pants are too tight, if shoes hurt, get rid of it. If there's like my dogs have dog tags that are rubber, they're like a different material, so they don't clink when they walk, right? So I've eliminated all this sensory stuff because if you are more sensitive to sensory stuff, your brain is having to filter that out and you may get dysregulated. So when I went through and figured out all the sensory stuff and shifted stuff, oh my gosh, it was like calm, peace. So we want to figure out if you have any sensory sensitivities, we want to actually alleviate that. We want to give this baby muscle a break because when you're regulating and you're like masking, you're working that muscle and it's not getting to rest, right? Unmasking. So we want to reduce your times of unmasking. So let's say you have some friends you hang out with, you have to mask a bit, and some friends that you don't, prioritize the ones that you don't, right? If you go into the office less and work from home and get your stuff done, great. If there are certain things where when you go into that environment, you do have to mask, pull that back and just do it for a week or two. Those friends can wait. Stimming. So stimming, and I've done a call on this, is engaging in stimming. This is how we regulate. And these are all steps to just be happy too for like ADHD, but letting yourself stim. And that could be rocking back and forth, getting some movement in, listening to the same song over and over again. These are things that make our nervous system feel safe. So we want to encourage stimming. And then just long-term management and prevention is have your special interests, reconnect with hobbies, things that make you happy, even if they seem childish, right? Who cares? Like if you like to collect Care Bears or something, go for it. Like this is stuff that makes us happy. You know, I'm trying to think of some other ones that I've seen clients have. Disney, if that's a special interest of yours, go to Disney World, or watch Disney movies and get popcorn and like love on that inner child. That's a really, really good thing. Boundaries, self-advocacy, create a sustainable routine that's not too rigid, and then work with a therapist, and that can be really helpful. So again, these are just like some self-care as a neurodivergent person, but this is the protocol if you want to get out of burnout, is to set aside time for radical rest, even if it's an hour a day, reduce all your demands, get rid of all the sensory stuff, get in a place where you don't have to unmask, and surround yourself with stuff that helps you stim, that gives you dopamine, that helps you feel safe, happy, right? And then if you also, I'm going to add to this, get some movement in every day, like 15 minutes of just walking, put on music or podcasts if you want. But this is a protocol that can really help you. So just a couple stats. They're saying they used to think that you couldn't have ADHD and autism. You could only be diagnosed with one or the other. And that was, I think it was like 10 or 15 years ago. It was really recent. Now they're saying 70% of people with autism have ADHD. 70% of people with autism have ADHD. And then they're saying 20 to 50% of people with ADHD display autistic traits. So that's really interesting, right? And so they're finding more and more people who have ADHD, especially if you're late diagnosed as an adult, may have autism too, because remember when I said they hide each other? So your autism can hide some of your ADHD. So if it's just pure ADHD, it's easier to get diagnosed. People notice it. But the needing sameness and routine and all these things kind of calm it down so it doesn't get diagnosed. And that's why they're saying a lot of late people with ADHD have a much more significant chance of having autism. And that's why they flew through the radar. Also, if you're a woman, just in general, it probably flew through the radar for a lot of people, which I pray that that's getting better, because you probably had to mask a lot as well. And then shared genetic risk. So there's a 50 to 70% genetic overlap, indicating some common neurodevelopmental pathways. So that's why they're finding more and more correlation and think that there might be more of a spectrum versus autism and ADHD. And that's some of the newer research. And then a couple of common misdiagnoses. So autism oftentimes gets misdiagnosed as anxiety. So if you're constantly overwhelmed, you have social overwhelm, and sensory overwhelmed. And a lot of times, if we don't know it's sensory stuff, which nobody tells us, we think it's anxiety, right? So think about this. And if you are in dress pants that are too tight, right? You're trying to work, and then there's noise coming. You can hear the person through the thin walls in your office, and they're talking a lot. And then there's fluorescent lights that you can't control. And it's also kind of hot. So you're sweating a little bit and you're not really comfortable. And the chair they gave you is really uncomfortable. And you are sitting there about to work. Aren't you going to have a little bit of anxiety maybe? Like that would be normal, but it's going to manifest a little bit differently. So think of all of that stuff, and it's like you can feel all of it. You're going to have heightened anxiety level. So if something hard happens, or you have to make calls and you're already a little bit dysregulated, you're a little bit overstimulated, all that stuff's going to be harder. And so you're going to feel anxiety a little bit easier, or you might just think you have anxiety and it could be social or sensory overwhelm. And so it gets misdiagnosed as that. Like, I'm in the office, I just get anxiety, my heart rate's up, I can't make calls, when really it's all the sensory stuff that's completely overwhelming your system. So if you turn the light off, you get noise canceling headphones, you get more comfortable clothes, you get a better chair, you find a way to pull the light bulb out of the one above, and you get a table lamp so you're not in big white light, and all of a sudden, I can breathe, I feel better. It could be more sensory stuff. It can also get misdiagnosed as OCD. So we can have rumination, we can have repetitive thoughts, we can have intrusive thoughts with autism. We can have a lot of common overlap with OCD. Also, OCD is really common to have if you also have autism. So you might have a label that doesn't quite fit. And then ADHD is often misdiagnosed as bipolar, because you can have highs and lows, right? But the bipolar is going to look at a little bit differently, and when you look at the patterns of when it's triggered, it's not going to have a trigger in the same way. It's going to be chemical versus environmental a lot of times. Borderline personality disorder. So ADHD, especially in women, misdiagnosed as a personality disorder or BPD. And autism too can be misdiagnosed as BPD. And then again, anxiety or depression. So that's why it feels important to talk about this. So if you have diagnoses, but something still doesn't fit or it still doesn't make sense, then it could be an answer. And then the brain fog, executive function, people pleasing, if you're losing love for things that you have because you're getting burned out, all of these things can be stuff that, again, the volume's just turned up, and it could be an indication. What I want to say is what do you do about this? So the most important thing you can do is you can build a business that works with your nervous system. So this is my key to do this. So we want to work with your nervous system, not against it, right? So we want to eliminate any sensory stuff that's harmful for us or overstimulating. If you have demand avoidance, you want to have periods where your phone is on do not disturb and is on silent, and you have callback times. So you're giving your system a break from constant demands. You want to pace yourself for sustainability instead of this huge overhaul that I'm going to do today, and I'm going to do this now, and everything's going to change in my business, and I'm in it. No, you want to choose like sustainable things that you can do where, okay, I'm going to do this once a week. I'm going to do lead gen. I'm going to hit 5. I'm going to talk to 5 people a day, once a day consistently, and then I'll bump it up to 10 after I do that for 2 months. So we want to ease ourselves in and build the foundational bricks versus what the ADHD can do is I'm going to do this extreme thing and change everything overnight, right? The other thing is unmasking. So starting to brand yourself and being authentic in your scripting, in your calls, everything you're doing with the people around you, with your teams, is start to slowly take the mask off so you can be yourself, because that's going to pull on your executive function. And if you're constantly masking and you think you've got to be this formal professional person, and that's not who you are, to use these really, more professional scripts, and you're really down to earth, shift what you're doing, And if you have people in your world that you've got to act a certain way for, or they're going to criticize you, work for somebody else. Go work with somebody else. We really want to honor the nervous system and get you being yourself versus masking. Sensory friendly lighting, right? Look at your environment that you're working in. Is that sensory friendly? Is it pleasing? Is it a place you want to work in? And we want to build systems that don't rely on willpower. So we're also going to prioritize your executive function, right? And so we want to create things that you don't have to think about. And that's where having like a touch plan on your people is really helpful. If you have automated emails, if you have a day where you're nonverbal, text instead of call. Get a text template or send it on Facebook Marketplace. Facebook Marketplace. Facebook. You can tell I use Marketplace a lot, right? Go on Facebook and have a message you copy and paste for your lead gen if you're in nonverbal mode that day. So we also want to have flexibility in plan B and C if you're ebbing and flowing in that executive function. We want to build a business around our brain and our nervous system instead of forcing ourselves to do it a certain way that we think we're supposed to do, when really it's going to make us shut down. And maybe we could do it for a month or two, but then we shut down, So that extreme thing, maybe you can do it for a little bit, but you might need something a little bit more gentle on your nervous system that you build up to, and then you can do some really significant big things. And then the other thing I'll say too with autism is transitions and task switching. So if you struggle with transitions, and this, I've worked with a lot of clients who have AuDHD. And funny story real quick is when I worked with MAPS, because I was with them for 8 years or 7 years, I was like, yeah, I do really well with clients who have autism. Like, I think I'm just really good at it because of my mental health background. Hey, I had autism too. So it was so funny. But I had a client that struggled with transitions. And so what we did is on the weekends, on Monday, instead of starting at 8 a.m. every morning, like normal, we had her start at 10 or noon. And so we eased her into the week. And then on Friday, we eased her out by kind of a closeout of the week and kind of transitioning out. And that really helped the burnout. I've coached quite a few people out of autistic burnout by this point, probably 20 or 30 in very severe burnout that we were able to pull them out within a month. Like, I'm not kidding, using certain protocols. But those transitions in and out, right? If we're gentle on your nervous system, you're not having to spend time regulating, like, it's 8 a.m., go back to work, let's go. It's like very jarring. The more that you can kind of work with it and get something that works, that can be helpful as well. But yeah, transitioning in and out of the week, transitioning in and out of the day, all this stuff can kind of gear you up to really knock it out of the park. With an AuDHD brain, there are a lot of really special things about it as well. It's really primed for business and real estate and the things that we do. And so I would encourage you to embrace that. And you can get a special interest and get really narrow on it and not let go of it and do amazing because you've studied it or you do it better than anybody else because it's your special interest and you don't get tired of it. So there's ways you can point your brain as well that can make you extremely successful. But we want to put stuff in place to mitigate anything that's like making more tense or burning you out. So then those significantly successful traits that you have that would work with that can kind of shine and come out. If you want to, I'm going to give you a test. This is for anybody who wants this. So if you want to take this, this is the most highly regarded self-assessment for adult autism, and it's designed for people who are high masking that usually get missed in the system. And you can take this, and if you score on this where you could be in the category for autism, then take this to your doctor, right? Take this to someone to give you a diagnosis if that's something you want to do. So it's called the RADS-R. So if you just want to take that, you can. And then you can take those results to your doctor if some of this has piqued your interest. And if you take it and you don't show up that you have autism, again, there's a lot of overlap with ADHD. So I'm not here to tell anyone that I'm trying to diagnose you, and having the name for it. I felt like, I don't know if anybody feel like this, like you felt like an alien growing up, or you just felt different and you didn't really know, or it's like, man, I'm just, I'm missing stuff, or why is this a little bit harder? Right. So that's kind of, I literally felt like an alien sometimes. So here's another way autism, does anybody not feel like an alien? Because autism doesn't always show up like that. They may not feel like an alien. You just were really social and work well, because people with autism are really friendly and approachable sometimes too. So it's kind of interesting. So yeah, have a wonderful day and take care of yourself. So, and yeah, we'll see you next time.